Hi everyone. Today we're talking about how to thrive as an actuary in the AI era. Is AI a threat or an opportunity for actuaries? What are some of the common mistakes that actuaries make when trying to get buy-in from stakeholders about using AI? And why is communication such an essential superpower for actuaries, especially in the age of AI? Joining us for this discussion from Paris is experienced pricing actuary and structured communication expert Claire Wang. Claire, welcome to the show.
Hi, Julia. Lovely to be here. Thank you for the invite.
Oh, thank you for being my guest, Claire. It's interesting, we're on opposite sides of the world, but we have
Yeah, exactly.
but we're having this conversation as though we're in the same room. Technology is so amazing. And we have so much in common as well, both with an actuarial background, and now we're in a training space and helping other actuaries and other professionals do things. So I'm really looking forward to this conversation with you today.
Likewise, Julia.
Thank you. And I thought before we start, Claire, maybe you can tell us a bit about what are you doing with your actuarial qualifications over there in Paris right now?
Yeah, sure. I guess, I would call myself a pricing practitioner turned
Mhm.
solopreneur. So when I was doing my actuarial work, I was focusing more on the pricing space. And these days, as a solopreneur, I run my own business. My focus is on helping pricing professionals to get better at communication. Specifically, how can I help them to get their message land more powerfully through either one-on-one coaching or online workshops, in-person workshops, things like that.
Amazing. Because if you can't communicate your message, it's very limiting what you can actually do, isn't it? You could be a great pricing professional, but if you can't actually
Yeah.
share your message or share, the everything that goes around that, sort of
Yeah,
get.
I mean, absolutely. Because what I often tell people is, people think pricing is a technical job, when
Mm,
in fact it really is a communication job.
mm,
Because, what we do is we have to liaise with like stakeholders from all different parts of the business.
mm,
And you are sort of like acting as the bridge, and your role is to be the glue to make sure that everyone's priorities align. And then you sort of like focus on the same common goal. And sometimes, that's not clear. And it is
mm,
our job to help stakeholders to get that clarity.
mm. And so communication is sort of the secret sauce to allow you to do that.
Yeah, I guess.
Well, it's one of my favorite topics, and my mission is to help actuaries build communication and leadership skills to have great careers and maximize their impact. So, I'm going to ask you something about leadership in a little bit, um,
Mhm.
but first, I want to ask you the question I ask all my guests, Claire, and it's this: how do you use your actuarial superpowers to make a difference in the world?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think my actuarial background has definitely given me a very good technical foundation.
Mm,
And it's particularly helpful these days when everyone is throwing the AI buzzwords around, right?
yeah.
And I think for me, I can tell whether someone who really has the knowledge about the AI, the algo, and all that, versus someone who's just using this as a marketing gimmicks.
Ah.
And yeah, and it's kind of like, I know what you're talking about. Don't try to fool me.
Yes, yes. Because it is a buzzword, isn't it? You're hearing it everywhere. It's in the mainstream media. It's everywhere. And so
Yeah,
yeah, so
and
you're
people tend to mix everything up, right? I
mm,
mean, Julia, you will know this. Like this sort of like running regression model or predictive modeling is nothing new. People's been doing that like, 20, 30 years ago.
mm,
But then these days, we just give it a new name and we call that AI. And
yeah.
all of a sudden, it just sounds much more sexy.
Mm,
But fundamentally, I think at the core, I'm probably oversimplifying this. But I think at the core, it is apply statistics, right? And that's what
mm,
actuaries do.
mm. Absolutely. And that's been our bread and butter for a long time. And
Exactly.
so as you say, when you've got a good grounding in that technical foundation, it helps you to kind of separate out whether what people are really talking about, what they really mean when they're talking about AI. And I think that's one of the important skills that we need to be able to apply in the modern workplace is being able to manage the risks, but also understand what is it that we're
Hmm.
talking about when we're talking about AI. What do we
Yeah.
mean?
Yeah.
And so therefore understanding and being able to diagnose its application in however we're wanting to use it. So
Hmm.
okay, excellent superpower. So the technical training gives you a good foundation. Okay. So
Yeah.
I want to ask a bit about leadership because this is my personal passion about making that transition
Yeah.
from technical roles. And as you said, that technical foundation is something that we all share as actuaries. But
Hmm.
I know lots of pricing actuaries struggle in making that transition from being a technical professional, a technical individual contributor, into strategic leadership. And so,
Hmm.
Claire, I wonder if you can share your thoughts on why this happens, and what are some practical steps that actuaries can take when they move beyond the spreadsheets into those decision-making roles.
Yeah, sure. I think the first is probably the mindset shift.
Mindset shift.
Uh, Yeah, and especially, I certainly have gone through that sort of transition myself, right?
Mm.
When you don't have the title of a manager, sometimes you feel like I'm not a manager, I cannot lead.
Uh-huh.
But that's completely untrue,
Mm.
Like you don't need a title to lead. And the way I sort of like think about it is, it's more about your ability to actively, proactively identify a problem and then provide a unique solution or unique perspective. And you can do that from any seat. You don't need to be a manager to do
Mm.
that.
Mm.
And once you adopt that mindset shift, I think you started to see things quite differently.
Mm.
And the most, I suppose, yeah, the most obvious one is probably it enables you to start focusing on outcomes rather than outputs.
Right.
Because when you are in that sort of analyst position, you feel like I have no power, so I have to do whatever my stakeholders or my managers ask of me. So
Hmm.
you produce whatever they ask. But once you start seeing yourself as a leader, then you start try to understand why do these people request this thing? Right? And once you apply the why, then you focus on the outcome. And I think it's very important to firstly have that mindset shift. And then once you have that, have the shift, start focusing on outcomes
Hmm.
rather than outputs. And
Hmm.
it's that transition. I think a lot of people could start considering if they want to move like to the next step of their
Mm.
career.
Mm. Yeah, I love that. And I think I love your distinction between leadership and managers too, because so my new book's
Hmm.
called Aspiring Actuarial Leaders. And sometimes that word
Hmm.
leaders gets people stuck. They think, oh, but I'm not in a leadership role. And I always say that, leadership is not, it's got nothing to do with how many direct reports you have. It's
Exactly.
it's got
Yeah.
everything to do with how you show up at work.
Hmm.
And we don't need to be managing people or have direct reports to be able to display that kind of leadership. And so
Hmm.
I love that mindset shift that you've just described, Claire, about not just doing the outputs, doing the tasks, but actually thinking about, well, what are the outcomes here? What am I trying to achieve?
Yeah, exactly. And
Yeah.
I think, communication again is sort of like the glue that links all this together, right?
Mhm.
Because uh, in order to influence, you need to make sure your message lands. And my recommendation, and this is quite practical, is, if you want to start training and improving your communication skills, the most important step number one is to actually start listening, like active
Ah,
listening.
mm,
And yeah, because this is something I've seen in a lot of like sort of younger analysts is you're in a meeting and sometimes your stakeholders ask a question. And instead of responding to that question directly, I feel sometimes people just respond with whatever they want to say or whatever they have prepared.
mm,
And when
mm,
you do that, it could really hurt your reputation. So
mm.
people think that communication is about putting together a nice presentation or being on stage, whereas I think fundamentally it all starts from being a good listener.
Oh, I love that. I love that. So, building on that example, then, you're in a meeting,
Mm,
someone asks you something. what is the best way to apply that active listening? What's a tip that you would give to an actuary who's in that situation and instead of just answering with what they want to say, how would
Mm.
you recommend they engage in more active listening in that situation?
Yeah, I think, the easiest way is to start with thank you for the question, just to make sure I understand this 100%. You are asking blah, blah, blah,
Mm.
right? So the benefits of doing this is firstly, you show your stakeholders you have been actively listening.
Mm.
So they feel like you respect what they've just said.
Mm.
Secondly, it also helps you to really make sure you understand what they want so
Mm.
that when you give them a response, you will know it hits the mark.
Mm. Mm. That's such great advice. I think there's not enough listening in business, too much telling.
Exactly.
Okay, so shifting from outputs to outcomes, that's an important skill for actuaries to make to be able to make that transition from technical roles
Hmm.
to strategic leadership and communication as well.
Exactly. Yes.
Yeah. Yeah, in particular that active listening. I think that's a really good
Hmm.
one. And I love that formula that you've just described as well, sort of that approach of thanking the person and then clarifying what they've asked. I think that's a really
Yeah.
powerful skill in lots of different situations too. I mean, I
You
take
can
for
apply that exactly, even
yeah.
in relationship.
Yeah. Yeah, it's got so many
Yeah,
applications, not just in a meeting.
yeah,
Yeah. Yeah,
exactly.
at home, with your friends, with your partner. But also, Q&A in a presentation after a presentation. Sometimes people worry about that. I think having some of
Mm,
these tools in your back pocket can be a really
hmm.
powerful way to manage nerves and boost your confidence as well, which also helps you at work.
Yeah. And I feel like for me personally, right? Even if I understand 100% what the other person is asking, the benefit of asking this question is also to buy yourself some time so
Yes.
you can construct how you want to respond to that
Yes.
question.
Yes,
So
absolutely.
it's a sneaky one.
It is
I will
sneaky.
highly recommend it.
That's a very great piece of advice. Thank you, Claire. All right, so let's talk about AI. I
Hmm.
mean, AI is getting better every day. I feel like it's really hard to stay up to date with and when I'm saying AI here, I mean, if I think about what I'm using day to day, I'm using a lot of generative AI tools like
Hmm.
ChatGPT and Claude to help me with writing, help me with tasks, help me with brainstorming. But even that, even though I'm using that on a daily basis, I feel like the changes are quite rapid. And so staying up
Yeah,
to date with
absolutely.
what's possible.
Hmm.
But I guess, thinking more broadly about how that applies to actuaries and AI in its different forms as well. I mean, do you
Hmm.
see AI as a threat to actuaries or an opportunity?
Um, yeah, so okay. I think the best way to answer this question is probably through a story.
Okay, excellent.
I love stories,
I do too.
as you could probably tell. So this story started in year 2008 when I first got my actuarial job as a pricing actuary with Suncorp. I was doing CTP green slip pricing. So for those of you who are not from Australia, CTP stands for compulsory third party, and it's a mandatory insurance that drivers need to get to cover the injury in case of an accident. And one of our job is to actually track what our competitors have been pricing for the same policy. So in order to do that, we designed this little web scraping tool. So basically, the tool will just go to each of our competitors' website, fetch the quotes, and drop that in a spreadsheet and summarize it. And that tool is super cool, but it took us like 2 months to develop.
Right.
And every time someone changed their website, we had to go back to the drawing board,
Of course.
like revise the code. So you could imagine it's just a lot of manual work.
Hmm.
Fast forward to today, like just the other day, out of curiosity, I just type in the same request into ChatGPT.
Hmm.
And in seconds, I got, basically a working skeleton of this web fetching tool.
Wow.
So from the output perspective, I definitely see this as, I guess, an opportunity because, you want to spend your time working on helping stakeholders to make more informed decision than fixing up a broken code, right?
Mm,
So this links a little bit to what we have been discussing previously about having this like output and outcome mindset.
mm.
If you see your job as purely producing output, then you probably will see AI as a threat because
Ah,
what you could do before now can be replaced in seconds. But if you see AI as a partner to help you to land on a better decision, better business recommendation, then I see this as an opportunity because it free you up the time so you can do more other value added work. So yeah, I hope that answers your question.
absolutely. And what a great parallel between a leader's mindset and seeing AI as an opportunity instead of a threat.
Hmm.
Because as you've said, if we're thinking about our job as doing the tasks, finishing, doing the bits and pieces, doing the outputs, working towards the outputs, AI tools can do those outputs for us a lot faster than we can.
Yeah, exactly.
And so if we see that as an opportunity to allow AI tools to replace the generation of outputs, and we can step into that thinking about the outcomes and thinking about
Mm.
the bigger picture and what are we
Hmm.
actually trying to do and elevating out of the detail, then I can
Hmm.
see from your story how powerful AI can be as an
Hmm.
opportunity for us to do greater things in the world and to really use our superpowers to make an even greater impact in the world.
No, exactly. The other thing I think actuaries can really step in is to be that translator who basically translates the outcome of AI to business. Because
Ah,
often we see, AI or the algo as a black box,
hmm,
and very few people can understand the nitty-gritty details, right? And when you can't really explain what's going on, how do you expect people to trust?
mm,
So I think that's where actuaries can come in because, if anyone would want to have a good chance of understanding what's going on, it is the actuary who has formal training in, statistics and mathematics. And
mm,
we are at the better position to actually really translate those complicated concepts into something simple for anyone to understand.
mm. Yeah, so we can act as a translator as well because we understand, we've got the technical training, we've got the foundational skills and
Exactly.
understanding to be able to translate.
Yeah.
When others maybe are just applying these tools without knowing what's actually going on under the hood, so to speak. Mm,
Exactly. Yeah.
okay. So that's a good segue then. I want to talk a bit about actuaries selling AI to stakeholders because quite often,
Hmm.
we're wanting to use these tools, but in order to be able to do that within our organizations, we need to get approval, we need to get buy-in from others.
Hmm.
What are some of the big mistakes that you see actuaries making when they're trying to sell AI and its benefits to their stakeholders?
Yeah, I think this problem is probably not limited to actuaries,
True.
but limited to, people who are more tech-minded in general.
Yeah, yeah,
Because sometimes we get too excited about the technology,
yeah.
about our model, about the new algo, whatever that is.
Yes.
So when we try to sell, we talk about the technology itself.
Uh-huh.
And forgetting that, at the end of the day, we need to sell trust first.
Mm,
And that goes back to, again, what we have been discussing is how can you explain this to people so that they can see the relevance of this model to their business?
mm, mm.
Um, yeah, and I think what I've seen a lot is, when people start talking about technology, sometimes they use like use cases. For example, this tool has worked in, US market,
Mhm.
or this company has adopted this and has seen a revenue uplift of 20%, whatever that is.
Mm,
But your stakeholders will be sitting there thinking, okay, this is what has worked for other market, other companies, but would this be relevant for me?
mm.
So how do you convince them to sort of like believe in this tool, right?
Yep.
Um, And I kind of make up this framework and I call that the C framework, like SEE. C is to basically to show, the first S,
Mm-hmm.
evaluate and enforce.
So
So
C, show, S for show, E for evaluate, and E for
enforce.
enforce. Okay. So
Yeah.
take us through that.
So yeah, so the first step is to show, and I guess, to show people what sort of data has been coming into the model.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
as you know, we always say garbage in, garbage
Right.
out.
Yep.
So if you can prove to your stakeholders that this model has been trained using good quality data, I
Mm.
think that's already an easy win.
Mm.
And also that helps your stakeholders to understand what sort of events this model has taken into consideration.
Mm.
I mean, even with generative AI tool like ChatGPT, for me, this is the black box. I have no idea what sort
Yep.
of data, they have been using to train the model.
Mm.
And we kind of just have to live with it. But when it comes to business, I think you will really provide people with more trust if they know exactly what data, what period of data the model has
Mm.
been using on training. So that's the first to show.
Mm.
The second is to evaluate. Again, when you try to adopt something, obviously the first step to do is not to apply that to mass market or to start implementing that. You
Mm.
probably want to start doing some testing, maybe in a smaller group, like test and learn, things like that. So evaluate is to really to see how your model will perform in the real world and
Mm.
start getting some real data coming in and then use that to convince your stakeholders that this model has legs.
Mm.
And then finally, enforce. So when I say enforce, it's really kind of like to decide like what sort of control you want to give to AI. Obviously, key decisions, you probably want to have certain control. And this is where you can come in and set some boundaries to tell AI like what it can play. So for example, you can set a boundary saying that, when we do a price increase, make sure the increase is always above 5% margin, something like that.
Yep.
Or, don't do a price increase on a customer who has been tagged as high churn risk.
Mm.
So there are a lot of things you can play around. So the last part is really to decide what sort of areas that you want to let AI play, and then what sort of areas that, humans should step in and make the final decision.
Mm. Mm. I love that
So
framework, Claire. That's so practical and so
yeah.
easy to understand and explain. Yeah, because I can see that, you said that the mistakes are often that we get caught up with the technology or we get excited about it. And we have a tendency as actuaries to, generalizing here, to do that with our models as well. When we're sharing results from our actuarial work, we're excited about the models that we've built, but actually few of our stakeholders really care about the actual model. They just care about
Yeah,
the so what.
absolutely. Yeah.
And so it sounds like we're maybe making similar mistakes when we're trying to get buy-in around using AI tools by getting excited about the AI tools or what they can do, but maybe our stakeholders don't understand them anyway, so they're not really that interested. But they are interested in, well, what's going into them and how do we feel confident and can we trust that it will work for our business and it can be reliable and
Yeah.
give us sensible outputs. And I think that's where your C framework comes in a very handy, systematic way to show
Yeah.
them what's going into it, to help them understand how it applies to our organization, and then also what
Hmm.
guardrails are we putting in place to make sure that we don't have any strange outputs coming through as well. So it's very, very powerful framework.
Yeah, I think at the end of the day, it really comes down to trust, right? So whatever that helps you to sell that trust.
Mm,
It doesn't need to be this framework, but I think it could be a good starting point for
mm,
people to consider.
mm. No, it's an excellent framework. Thank you. And I think yeah, I think so often we think about ourselves in our communication and not what our stakeholders need or what our audience needs. So back to your point about in the meeting, it's not about saying what we want to say. It's about
Yeah,
understanding what others are trying to convey. So yeah,
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 exactly.
yeah.
Yeah.
Very great, great messages. Thank you. Okay, so it's been really useful to hear your stories, your tips, your frameworks. So thank you for sharing those today, Claire.
No problem. My pleasure.
I'd like to end with one question, and it's this. What's your top tip for actuaries wanting to thrive in the AI era?
To double down on that communication skills. So yeah, I think Julia, you're nodding. I'm sure you will agree to that. Especially the more senior you get, you'll learn that it's really just about stakeholder management, understanding what's the priority of the company. And to get all that, it really communication is key. It's so important to lend your message. And it also helps you to, yeah, as we've mentioned, it's not just business, right? It's kind of, I see this as a super tool that helps you in all aspects of your life,
Mm.
business, relationships, friendship, whatever that is.
Mm.
So double down on communication skills. It will really help you a long way.
That's great advice. Claire, thank you so much for your time today. It's been wonderful hearing your tips, tricks, and advice all the way from Paris. So I hope that you're having a wonderful time over there, and I'm sure that your tips and strategies today will be very, very useful for all of our listeners. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Thank you, Julia. Lovely to be here. And thanks for the invite again.